Perfect. Okay. Lovely. All right. Firstly, we're going to have a look at the organisations this evening. So myself from Community Action Groups Oxfordshire. So we're a network of community groups across Oxfordshire County that are running grassroots sustainability initiatives. And our work is made possible by Oxfordshire County Council. We've also got Joe Harvey from Sustainable Wanted. So they are a community group. There's Joe waving at you. They're a community group based in South Oxfordshire who've set up a variety of community repair initiatives, from repair cafes, repair workshops, and a laptop rescue project, which we're going to hear all about later on. And last but not least, Phoebe Brown from Repair Cafe Wales, and they support repair cafes across Wales, but also across the rest of the UK as well. So in the session this evening, we're going to look at the importance of repair and examples of community repair in action. We're going to look at some of the practical aspects of getting started, and we'll also have a chance for questions at the end to myself or to the other speakers. And then we'll look at some of the support that's available for new initiatives from the various organisations here and beyond. Okay, so firstly, why is repairing our stuff more important than ever? So globally, we're buying and binning items at a faster rate than we ever have before. And as I'm sure you know, this has really severe social and environmental impacts. And for the purpose of demonstrating these impacts, we're just going to look in a little bit more detail at two types of products, so textiles or clothes, and electrical and electronic items, such as your laptops and your smartphones. Firstly, electricals and electronics. So in recent years, demand for these kind of products has increased significantly, and producing these devices is a really energy intensive process. So for example, manufacturing one mobile produces 55 kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions. I think annually we buy about 2 billion mobiles a year, so that's pretty significant. And the amount of e-waste that gets binned every year weighs the same as 4,500 Eiffel Towers. And in the UK, we contribute quite significantly to that. So we're the second highest producer of e-waste per person in the world. Producing these devices also requires a significant number of raw materials, including minerals, which are obtained through mining. And mining is a highly polluting process. So for example, the use of acids and chemicals can threaten the health of nearby communities, as well as polluting the local environment. It also requires a huge amount of water. Most of the minerals that are mined are mined outside of Europe and North America, and mining practices can have really severe impacts on the local communities there. For example, issues around land, so land being taken from indigenous communities without their consent, and also people working in mines facing very precarious working conditions. Lots of mining is also linked to child labour and armed conflict. So the issues I'm touching on aren't exclusive to mining, but this is just to demonstrate the extent of the social and environmental impacts of manufacturing the goods that we consume. Which I think are often kind of invisible to us as consumers. So to take another example is the textile industry. So the fashion industry is responsible for 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And that's more than greenhouse gas emissions from all international flights and maritime shipping combined. Likewise, it also consumes a lot of water, so it's the second largest consumer of water worldwide. And as we've seen with electronics and electricals, the rate of consumption is going up. So production has doubled since 2000, and I'm sure you're all aware of the sort of emergence of fast fashion. People are throwing away their items twice as quickly as they were back in 2000. And unfortunately, very little of that is getting recycled, so only 1% currently. As we can see from both of these examples, our rate of consumption isn't sustainable, it's not ethical, and repairing our stuff is one key way that we can increase the lifespan of the products that we buy, and thereby reduce the need for energy and resources that go into making those products. And the effect can be quite significant. So, for example, fixing a laptop can divert over 100 kilograms of greenhouse gas emissions. So now we've talked a little bit about why repair is important. I'm just going to pass over to Joe, who can tell you a little bit more about what communities are actually doing about this, and some of the different projects that people have set up. So I'm going to carry on sharing my screen, Joe, so just let me know when you want me to move over.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good. So I'm going to talk about community repair in action, basically talk you through what we're doing at Sustainable Wantage. It started for us about 7 years ago when I attended a session at a CAG Skillshare event put on by the Restart Project. I can see we've got James from the Restart Project here. Hurrah! Totally inspirational. I thought it sounded like an absolute genius idea, this idea of a repair cafe. But being completely lacking in any kind of repair skills myself, I then spent about a year trying to find people who were competent and happy to volunteer, just talking to lots and lots of people. This picture here is from our very first repair cafe. You can see we were incredibly high tech and recorded all our repairs on the back of a roll of wallpaper. We had about 4 repairers with us in the room. We've got Jim and Gary here. And even at this very first event we did, there were 3 really important things that we found out. The first was that people brought stuff, lots of people brought stuff, and they all brought things they thought they were going to have to throw away. The second is we went through 14 or 15 items and 12 of them were totally fixable, which is much higher than we thought we were going to get. There were a few things people brought and they needed parts, or they needed to go off and find something else, and we gave them advice so they knew how to fix it themselves when they left. But most of them we actually managed to fix on the spot. We started out really low tech. The guys all brought their own tools and shared what they had. It was a very basic, tables and chairs in a room job. But the third really important thing we discovered is that the volunteers had a really good time. They absolutely loved it. They loved helping people. They loved being able to have a go at stuff. They really enjoyed the challenge. And they didn't just help other people learn, they themselves learned. So if you move on to the next slide, Anais, there's 3 of them having a whole meeting over a heater they were trying to fix. And Jim at the back normally does woodwork, but he got so involved. Ray, who's an electrician, started telling him about how things were working, and they had a really good time and a really good learning experience themselves. Of all the different things that we've run, Repair Cafe has got to be my favourite, I have to say. It's been going 4 or 5 years now, and the group that we've got are like a really highly skilled family. They love meeting up each month. They have a real give it a go attitude. Lots of the time I get asked, oh, what can I bring? What kind of stuff do you repair? And the answer is, they'll have a go at pretty much anything. If you can carry it through the door, these guys will have a go at fixing it, basically. And we've ended up creating kind of mini experts within our group. So on the next slide, you'll be able to see Justin, who has become the toaster guy. Poor Justin gets regularly covered with crumbs. He did a few toasters near the start, and now each time we get a toaster, it's like, oh, Justin, we got another one. So that he's our go-to. So he decided the way to deal with this is to demand that we had bread available, so that every time he fixed a toaster, he was able to fully test that it was working. That was his way forward. In lockdown, obviously, since the end of March, none of this has been happening. We had a really big pause where we didn't do anything at all. We recently helped a repair cafe in Stanford in the Vale set up, and they were taking in items and repairing them at home. So we were directing people towards them for a while. Then we wanted to find a way that we could get going again, but rather than just taking things for the volunteers to work on at home, still have that kind of interactive, getting the person involved in their repair, that learning experience. So we've tried a few online. We've been online for the last 3 months. We're going to have to see how it goes. We've had a few people at one. The last one we did this weekend, nobody turned up. So these guys had a nice chat with each other for an hour. The plan is with the online one, people join the Zoom, show their item. They can go out into a breakout room with the volunteer with the right kind of skills who can talk them through how to diagnose what the issue is. If it's something pretty straightforward, it's fixable on the spot. And if it's something that needs to be brought into us, then it gets dropped off at the Mix, our community space, quarantined. The volunteer comes to pick it up, then it gets quarantined, then it gets pat tested, then it gets quarantined, and then it goes back to the owner. It's a bit of a long process, but it's a way round not being able to have a repair cafe at the moment. If something comes to us to work on, we wanted to be able to show what we've done. So on the next slide is toaster guy Justin's fix of a cassette player. So he managed to fix, replace some drive belts, and to let the person know what he'd done in case it happened again, he's given the instructions. This is just an example of several pages of how you get the bits out. He's clearly spent a lot of time explaining his repairs to me, because he's put the tape transport chassis, the shiny metal thing, because that is the kind of instruction I would need if it was my repair. One of the things that I really like about the Repair Cafe is the skill sharing element, and that it empowers people to have a go. Obviously, we don't want people fixing chainsaws or anything like that. We start small, but that people feel it's not impossible. It's not kind of outside their area to try something. And we really see people that come quite regularly build a lot of confidence and start to have a go at things a bit themselves and say, I started taking it apart, I think it might be this bit. And that's really, really lovely to see. One of our volunteers as well, who's actually a computer guy, fixed his own washing machine via email advice from the other repairers. So lots more repairs happening outside of the Repair Cafe. As we feel this learning side is important, we've tried to find other ways to offer these kind of opportunities. So the next slide shows our upholstery class. We got the lady on the left is called Kate. She's an upholsterer. She comes along and teaches some classes for us. We thought we'd give it a try, and she's now got a whole following of upholstery addicts. Each time they finish a chair, they go, I've got a new chair, I've got a new chair, can I start again? So that's really lovely, using traditional skills. And the other one we were asked for was a plumbing workshop, which is the next slide. The guy who teaches this on the right is Jonathan, and he's a plumber, and he comes along at the start of the class and puts down the middle of the line of tables a big long piece of wood with every single tap he's ever come across in his plumbing jobs attached. So the idea is that you find a tap that looks the most like yours, and you can take it apart and see what's in it. And then they run through all your kind of basic plumbing skills that you might need around the house in the day. And we've done LED windmills, which are made from a hubcap with a step motor from a printer and some LEDs, so that when you spin it, they all light up. We've done computer surgery, so people can come in and book a little one-to-one slot and do anything from how can I set up my email to I'm looking to add more memory and change my graphics card and other things like that. We've done clothing surgeries as well, although we found those a bit harder to get people along to. But whilst none of this was happening in the spring, oh, my computer's going to do something funny now, hold on. If we go on to the next slide, my husband's a teacher, and he found he was trying to support a lot of students working at home who didn't have access to devices. So they were trying to do things on phones. There were families, 2 or 3 children trying to share a laptop with mum who also needed it for work. So really tricky to get people still involved in their day-to-day school education. So he thought, being a bit of a techie himself, that we could get a few laptops donated and find a few people to fix them up. It seemed a good way to keep our Repair Cafe volunteers active, and we got a good group of them together who were keen, and we put out a shout for laptops, and we were absolutely inundated. I think half of Oxfordshire has a laptop in their cupboard that they've just been waiting to give to somebody. They've been driving to us from all around the county. This is when we put out this Facebook post on the picture, is when we put out a shout in October when we ran out, and it just got shared and shared and shared, and again we had a whole lot of laptops in. When we started off, I thought we'd get a dozen or so and we'd be doing quite well. As of last week, we've fixed up and given away 99 laptops, which is a bit crazy, which means we've probably seen actually about 150 laptops, because we have a reasonably high failure rate. A lot of them come with broken screens and things that makes it harder to use, but you can always use pieces, so it's always worth having the bits. There are lots of other groups doing similar things, possibly a whole lot more professionally than we are. We're kind of winging it a bit, but it's good to see how things go. There's a company, organisation called Solidaritech in Bradford, who are updating, fixing up devices for refugees and asylum seekers to allow them to pursue their studies and start businesses or convert their qualifications. There's a library of things in Plymouth called Borrow Don't Buy, and as well as fixing up and donating devices to people, they encourage local businesses and organisations in one street to make their Wi-Fi publicly accessible, so people were able to get online as well, not just having the device. And I think there's a lot of people out there with stuff they want to fix. There's a lot of people out there with skills they'd like to use, and the Repair Cafe is just a brilliant way of pulling it all together. My experience is that the volunteers love it, the people who come love it, and people actually don't really want to throw stuff away if there's a choice. So there we go, that's it from me.
Great, thanks so much, Jo. Okay, and now so we'll move on to Phoebe from Repair Cafe Wales, who can talk a little bit more about how groups can get started. So Phoebe, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. Thanks. Hi everyone. So yes, I'm from Repair Cafe Wales, so we do focus on just sort of the Repair Cafe side of things. So I've tried to keep the next few slides a little bit more general in terms of hopefully they'd be applicable to any type of repair project. But I think it's also worth noting that repair projects often work best when they're sort of flexible to the community that they're based in. So a lot of this you'll be able to sort of adapt it and flex it depending on who it is that you're working with and your sort of community requirements. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So I've just sort of run through some of the basic things that you'd want to consider when you were setting up something like a repair cafe. So we find the best place to start is with volunteers. And as Jo mentioned, you won't struggle to find them. There's lots of people with skills and with enthusiasm to get fixing. The way we tend to do it is find a community organizer. So whatever your project is, find someone in the community that can take ownership of that project. Normally it works best if there's someone that's very well embedded within their community, so knows what that community needs and things like the best place to advertise for volunteers. So is there a local newsletter that you can advertise in, or is it best to put it on Facebook, for example? So someone that can sort of maintain that group and make sure everything's ticking over from month to month. And then in terms of finding general volunteers, always good to sort of use existing groups. So you might have an existing green network within your local community or other sustainability groups, or if not, just sort of general volunteering groups. So we often find that people that are interested in other volunteering and other community groups, there's usually a lot of overlap. So that's a good place to start. And then you can do things like utilise social media, posters, banners, newspapers, local newsletters, as I mentioned, and then websites such as Nextdoor are a good place to advertise. Always worth pointing out when you're looking for volunteers that you're not necessarily looking for professional fixers, and you're not necessarily looking for people with just fixing skills. So I think our two most commonly asked questions are, can I come along even if I can't fix anything? And do I have to have professional qualifications? And the answer is no to both of those things. So you also need people that can be what we tend to call a host volunteer. So make everyone feel really welcome, point people in the right direction, make sure all the forms are filled in, make sure everyone's got a cup of tea and someone to sort of be a friendly face and have a chat to. So good to make sure that people are aware that there's lots of skills that you can get involved with a repair cafe. Next one, please. So then you need a space. So we tend to use community halls, church halls, arts venues, and we don't tend to pay for our venues. So often with a repair project, you bring in a really diverse footfall into a venue that won't necessarily see all of those people. So they tend to give it to you for free. So always worth asking. Some of the things to consider when you're trying to find a space to run a repair project is it accessible? And is it near public transport links? Obviously, we want to encourage as far as possible for people to not use their car. And also it needs to be, if someone's carrying quite a heavy item, it needs to be easy for them to sort of get in and out of. Then you need somewhere with lots of plug sockets and good lighting for any fiddly repairs. And then enough space. So you can see in this picture that we've got several tables set up. This is obviously pre-COVID because people are very close together, but you'll often want, as Joe really sort of well pointed out, that you want to encourage that learning. So having people sat across from the fixer and watch their item be fixed is a really good way to, one, enable them to talk the fixer through the problem, because it might not always be obvious, but two, also to learn how they're doing it, so that they've got a bit more confidence in attempting a fix themselves next time, for example, or even just opening something up. So make sure you've got the space for that. And then tea and coffee facilities. This one sounds really basic, but it's actually really important. So a big part of a lot of our repair projects is that community aspect, and just sitting and having a cup of tea and a natter with your neighbour, and with people that you normally wouldn't even be in a room with. So making sure that there's either a kitchen or space to plug in a kettle is important. And then next, these are some of the things that you probably want to consider when you start out. So tools is obviously the most obvious. We often find that volunteers have their own tools and kind of prefer to use the ones that they're used to. So you wouldn't really need a huge amount when you get started. You might not need any. Some of our repair cafes just use their own volunteers' tools. But it's something to bear in mind, as you might want a few to sort of get you going. And also for any sort of budding fixers who are just sort of learning and starting out, they might need to borrow some. A pat tester is really important. So this checks the safety of electrical items. You can get free online pat testing courses. They're really easy to do. They take about 10 minutes. And it just means you can sort of check that things are safe, and sometimes will be a requirement for your insurance as well. Extension leads are really handy to have. Then any forms. So with repair events, you'll often get a repair form. So with a repair cafe, you fill in a form to say what the item is, some of your personal details, and then also you're signing to say that you agree to sort of the terms and conditions. So just sort of covers you in case of any incidents. Signage is good to have as well. So just sort of, we often like to put, so for example, textiles volunteer, electrical volunteer, woodwork, just to point people in the right direction. Donations tins, so repair cafes fix things for free, which is obviously a really core part of what we do, but often people want to donate, so good to have donation tins visible. And then the tea and coffee, as I mentioned, maybe some biscuits as well if you want. And then lastly, I thought I'd just touch on insurance, because it's a bit of a controversial issue, this one, and it's something that's a bit tricky for repair events, something that we're working on as a network, really. But in terms of where to get started with insurance, because it can often be quite expensive for an individual group, there are a few ways around that. So one is to get in touch with a repair cafe network, and it will be cheaper to join under a network than to get your own insurance in many instances. So for example, with Repair Cafe Wales, we have people sort of come under our umbrella, as it were, and they can get our insurance for £50 a year rather than, for example, £350 a year if they were to be by themselves. Your local authority might be able to help out. So we've spoken to a number of groups recently whose county council have given them insurance for free. And they often say it's worth pestering them and pointing out that you're helping them hit all their environmental targets. Same with the local housing association, they might be able to cover you. In some instances, your venue's insurance might also cover the activities inside the hall, for example. And then there's also local environmental groups. So your local CAG group or transition group might be able to insure you as well. Next slide. Yeah, and then we thought it'd be worth sort of touching on COVID considerations. So we've been able to sort of run in various forms, and Joe's pointed out some of them. So for example, online events throughout the past year. It's been tricky, but it's definitely doable. So some of the things to consider are risk assessments. There's lots already out there, so you can obviously sort of pinch existing ones. Repair Cafe Wales have got ones that you can access if you wanted to use those. Quarantining items, again, as Joe mentioned, PPE if necessary, and also your venue requirements. So putting in place one-way systems, hand sanitizer, signage that you can get online, and things like that. And then just as an example of what we've done on the next slide, these are some pictures of a recent outdoor cafe that we did. So it's a little bit different in Wales. We're allowed to have up to 30 people outside. I think the rules are different in England, but these are some pictures from last month. So this is November in Wales. So I think that sort of proves how much people love these events, that they were willing to come out in November in Wales and get fixing. And we had lots of people come through the doors. Actually, it was really popular, and it was just so lovely to have everyone back together again. We had some tea and coffee donated from a local coffee shop that you can see there. And these are our two lovely host volunteers who welcome people through the doors. So that's been a format that's worked really well for us, and maybe something to consider as the weather gets a bit warmer later next year.
Great. Okay, thank you. Thanks so much, Phoebe. All right, so before we go on to next steps, then I think we'll just take time for some questions. We've gotten through a little faster than I was expecting, which almost never happens. So so we'll have plenty of time to talk through any questions that you might have. If people want to put, just because there are quite a few of us on the call, I think we'll just try to ask people to just put them into the chat if that's okay. So we've got a question for Joe. Why? I think this was about the clothes rescue. I'm not clothes surgery. I think that you said didn't work very well. What was that? Yeah,
we did it a few times, and we had a lot of people in advance go, oh yeah, that'd be really useful. I need to bring this, I need to bring that, and then on the day we'd have like 1 or 2 people come. I really don't know why it is, because I know other repair cafes near us have several sewing repairers in their repair cafe who are busy like the whole time. So we have one lady who comes to do sewing repairs, and she brings something of her own to work on, because mostly that's what she does. We just don't seem to have people coming forward with those. But we did have one quite exciting one. I don't know if I can share my screen a minute.
Should be able to.
Hold on. Tell me when you can see it. It should be a rabbit.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a rabbit coming. So this is Wilfred the bunny, who's 70 years old, and got his ear chewed off by a dog, which was a little bit worrying. But he was repaired. We found some like fabric and remade the ear, and then the washed chewed bits of his ear are the stuffing in his new ear, so that he still has all his original materials. So that was a fun fix.
Nice. All right, thank you. Okay, great. The next question, well, so sort of 2 on pat testers and pat testing. So firstly, what's the best kind of pat tester to go for? And secondly, I think basically, yeah, where can you find PAT testing courses? I'll just touch on that second one. So I don't know if you're based in Oxfordshire, but if you are, CAG Oxfordshire will be running some PAT testing training in the new year. So just get in touch. I don't know if Repair Cafe Wales offers similar training, or if you've got any suggestions for which PAT testers people should buy.
So with the training, there's a number of free online courses. Can't remember the free ones off the top of my head, but I can definitely sort of send you the links after the call. And then there's another online one with Parker Bell that's about £30. The benefit of that one is you get a certificate. So if that's something that's important to you, then that's the benefit of that one. With the PAT testers, we've got a brilliant head of assets volunteer who sources secondhand refurbished PAT testers for us. So they end up being around £65, which is a really, really good price. And obviously it's all in the interest of sustainability with them being secondhand. Again, I think they're Parker Bell model, but I can double check for you. But obviously if they're new, they tend to be a little bit more expensive. So you're looking around £150 for the new ones, I believe. Does that cover that? Sorry, I can't.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Phoebe. And just to add to that, again, if you are based in Oxfordshire, we are able to provide free PAT testers for groups here. Yeah, in terms of training, it is important to get one. I think it's worth speaking with whoever's insuring you, but most insurers will require a certain sort of standard. You might need to sort of have something that gets a certificate, for example. So it's just worth checking in with them what's going to be acceptable for them, basically. And another question from Angela was, which group or organisation would be good to link up with in West Oxfordshire about getting insurance? I can speak to you about that afterwards, so do get in touch. Another one on insurance. Public liability, they said, costs them around £90 to £100 a year. What extras did you add to yours, Phoebe? That was you.
So we tend to take a bit of a belt and braces approach and sort of cover ourselves as much as possible. So we have public liability, product liability, employers and directors as well, which covers our board of trustees. And then that covers, so we've got 36 repair cafes that insurance then covers. And yeah, it works out about £50 a repair cafe.
Thank you. Yeah. And I suppose, yeah, and the sort of insurance you get might depend a little bit on the group that you have. So, for example, some groups might want to get sort of trustees indemnity to cover your sort of committee members, for example, or like employers liability for covering volunteers is really recommended as well. And another question for Joe or Phoebe, you can take this one. Did you start with securing the venue first, or did you get the volunteers first and the venue second? Joe, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, it was quite easy for us because we already had a venue. We have a community space, and one of the reasons we started up the Repair Cafe was finding different ways to use that space for sustainability initiatives. So we didn't have to worry about that, although our space is very small, so we can only get 4 or 5 repairers in at once. And I know repair cafes often work well when you've got a room with maybe 10 different repairers and people can come and be moving around and see what else is going on around them. So ours is a pretty small version.
Thank you. Phoebe, did you want to add to that?
We tend to have someone approach us in, I think it could work either way around, to be honest, but we tend to get someone approach us saying, I would love a repair cafe in my area, can you help me set it up? And they then tend to be our organiser, and then we find the venue. But equally, I think it would work the same if you found the venue first and then the volunteers.
Thank you. And there's just a question about the cost of calibration. In my experience, I think we've paid about £60 for calibration, but it might be possible to get it cheaper than that. And they normally need calibrating annually.
Yeah, we do ours annually, and I think it was a similar price. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. So another, yes, and there's a sort of message from Colin to everyone. This is the City and Guilds electrical equipment maintenance and testing. That's the kind of, I suppose, the gold standard of PAT testing. That course is quite expensive from what I remember. There are ones that you can get for less than that, that are still of good quality. So it sort of depends on what you've got available to you.
That was required by our insurance. That's the only reason we went for that. But having heard someone take it online for like 15 minutes, if you take that as being certified and you kill someone, your insurance will not say that you're basically a competent person. So you can do it on the cheap if you like, but you have to think about what happens if it goes wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Really, really important to make sure that, I mean, not only to be doing stuff for the sake of being covered, but also that you are actually, you know, that the people that are doing it actually know what they're doing, because, you know, the likelihood of something going wrong might be low, but potentially if you are, you know, if something did go wrong with an electrical and electronic and caused a house fire, it could be pretty severe damage. So it's definitely important to make sure that your volunteers are competent. And another one on insurance. Yeah, just asking about whether CAG Oxfordshire can support with insurance. We can, as I mentioned earlier, we're a network of community groups, and if groups want to start up a repair cafe and want to join our network, we can support with the costs of insurance, and we can point them in the direction of different insurers. It has been, it's been a little bit of a tricky year for Repair Cafe with regards to insurance, and it's something that across the UK we're finding there's a real need for finding kind of better deals with insurance and really communicating with insurers what it is that a repair cafe actually is and what the risks really are, because I think it's actually, you know, fairly low compared to what they often have thought. So it's definitely something that we're working on, but we can support with that. Another question from, are you able to cover your costs with donations, or do you have grants from the council? Joe, did you want to pick up that in terms of how you're covering costs for the repair cafes and other activities?
Yeah, so with Repair Cafe, we generally do by donation. We have had grants from time to time, sort of to do a set number of repair cafes. But with the donation, we say to people, as a bit of a guide, if we fix something that stops you having to buy a new thing, consider donating, say, 10 to 15% of the price of the new thing. And we find that generally, actually, we do pretty much cover our costs with donations.
Great, thank you. Thanks very much. And are there any other questions? And someone mentioned that local councillors do have a small discretionary fund that might be useful. That's definitely a good place to look.
That's definitely worth going for, that one. It involves a lot less paperwork.
Thanks, Jo. And just, I mean, to come back to the point of operating during the pandemic, I think we sort of touched on a couple of different ways that groups have worked, you know, during this year. But I think something maybe we didn't touch on is how you can run in-person events when restrictions are, you know, because as you mentioned in Wales, that it was a 30 people limit. But obviously in England it's a lot lower. So we have had a group in Oxfordshire that were running really small events. So they only had 6 people in attendance at any one time. They were doing it outdoors. They worked with had a gazebo, because obviously for doing electricals and electronics, you need to make sure that it's not going to get wet. And that actually worked really well. So in terms of how they kind of controlled the numbers, they got people to book a sort of slot beforehand via, I think via Eventbrite or a Google form. And then people turned up, and obviously it kind of reduces the amount of stuff that you're able to repair, but it does mean that you can kind of continue to be doing stuff during lockdown. And obviously in the winter doing outdoor events is quite tricky, but hopefully in the spring that's going to be a bit more of an option. And I don't know if anyone's got any other questions just on on that point, specifically relating to operating during COVID. Feel free to just pipe up, just unmute yourself if you like.
I could just share from Nottingham. We've done a one-off online repair cafe, slightly differently from the one that was mentioned earlier. With ours, we asked people to book in advance, and we got about 6 people, and they told us what it was they had an issue with. So we were sure that we'd got somebody there. We discussed beforehand, like who might like to chip in. Then they actually attended on the day. We had just an hour's online Zoom, and we all sat in for the whole of it. So we heard each other's, which was really quite nice and manageable with 6 people. And we had, yeah, quite a variety of things, a couple of vacuum cleaner, clock where the hands had fallen off, a textile repair. And although nothing actually got repaired online, there was some really useful advice, sort of giving people an idea of what to look at, whether it was potentially repairable, whether it might be worth spending a bit of money on going to a professional repairer. We looked up an online guide for the vacuum cleaner and referred them to that to show that, you know, whether it was even feasible to get inside it. So it was nothing like as comprehensive as a repair cafe, but it actually had a nice feel to it. And we had discussed whether to have breakout rooms, but obviously it takes confidence both on the repairers and the visitors' sort of confidence to even attend perhaps something like that. But it did work. It was a stab in the dark, but obviously we knew beforehand that we got 6 people coming, so it wasn't, we didn't just sit there waiting, and that was quite reassuring.
Thank you, Jill. Great, yeah, and we've definitely heard a lot about different groups who've been trying online repair cafes, and it has worked. And obviously, you know, as you said, Joe, earlier, you know, sometimes it doesn't always come together, but it's definitely worth trying. I mean, something just to touch on that is that if you are doing obviously electrical and electronic repairs, you do need to pat test items before people take them. So that's just take them home with them. So that's just something to consider how you do that if people were repairing their own items. I think Phoebe, you said you'd maybe worked with some groups who have done it where people would drop off the items and then the fixer would kind of go on to Zoom and sort of show them how they fix the items. I'm going to let you maybe explain that better than I am.
Yeah, sure. We've done a bit of kind of a drop off and collect type service. So because we can't go inside the venues, it gets dropped at the venue to the fixer. They do a bit of a analysis of it, check they think they probably can fix it, take it home to fix, and then drop it back off with the owner. But in the meantime, they've often set up a Zoom call so they can sort of still show the owner of the item how they're fixing it and ask any questions and that kind of thing. But it's quite a good way to keep going through a lockdown, because it means volunteers can be very sort of flexible with when they fix, and they quite like that. So you're not just sort of limited to 3 hours on a Saturday once a month. And if you can't get inside a venue, it's quite a good alternative.
Great, thank you. And just to add to that, I know that some groups have been trying this kind of drop-off and collection service where people, it's less about showing someone how to fix stuff, and it's more about just like fixing the item, and that might work for some groups. I think some other groups maybe feel that that's not really why they set up. It's more about sharing skills, and potentially there's something around competing with existing repair services if you're doing that as well. So something to bear in mind.
Just to touch on that, yeah. Sorry, Anna, to jump in, we did have quite early on when we started doing repair cafes, a local repairer who was a little bit put out that he thought we were basically taking business from him. But we did talk to him about how it was about people learning how to fix their own things, learning that things were likely to be fixable, and that actually hopefully it would create more of a will to repair. but initially he was quite put out. So it's worth, if you are thinking of setting something up and you have local repairers, having a bit of a chat to them first, giving them a heads up about why you're doing what you're doing could be useful.
Thank you, Jo. Just another question from Judith. So how much time does it take to run a repair cafe? So you're running one event per month. What's the kind of, how, yeah, I guess beyond the session, what's the kind of unseen time that goes into that? And how, Jo, do you want to maybe pick that up?
For us, because we do ours, well, in normal times, we do ours every month. We've got a set group of people to ask who can come. It's actually pretty easy. So I email everybody a week or so in advance, see who's free. Then we're there half an hour early setting up, and we're there about an hour after clearing up. And that's it. That's the whole thing. The biggest thing was finding the volunteers in the first place, got to say.
Yeah, I would echo that. Once you're sort of up and running, they're very sort of self-sustaining, and once you've got a really reliable pool of volunteers, then there isn't much work outside of the event other than maybe an odd bit of promotional posting on Facebook, or a post in a newsletter, for example. They tend to really sort of spread by word of mouth, and once they're sort of up and going and you've got your basic toolkit and you've got your reliable volunteers and your regular venue slot, then there isn't a huge amount of work that goes on behind the scenes, really.
Yeah, well, I would slightly disagree with that. It's always more than you think. I mean, partly it was kind of meetings and discussing how we do this and how we do that. But the other thing that's not seen is every repairer packing up their own toolkit and lugging everything to the venue, which becomes easier when you do it often because you just don't unpack your toolkit when you come home.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, and roughly, I don't know if either of you could pick up, like roughly how many volunteers would you say it sort of takes to run a repair cafe?
Totally dependent on your venue, I guess, and how much demand there is in your local area. So we have some that will run with 4 or 5 volunteers, and then we've got others that will run in sort of bigger locations with 20 to 30 volunteers. But I'd say you definitely need a couple of electrical volunteers. So I'm probably about 80% of our fixes are electrical items, so they're really crucial to have. And then it's good to try and sort of cover the other specialities as well. So great to have sort of a textiles repairer and a woodwork repairer. That's a good place to start, and a host volunteer, as I mentioned. But I think, you know, you can start small and then it will build as people hear about the cafe. And you tend to find that people that come along and learn how to get something fixed, all of a sudden remember that they also know how to fix something, and they've got this skill that they didn't actually think would be of any use, but really it's hugely useful, and no one else knows how to fix what they know how to fix. So you often get visitors coming back as volunteers as well, which is really nice.
Yeah, definitely. We've had that quite a lot. We've recruited most of our volunteers while we've been up and running. So we have about 4 or 5 volunteers within each session, at least 3 who can do electrical, because as you say, most of them are electrical. But then, yeah, we've now got a pool of about 15 volunteers, just because people keep coming in and going, can I get involved? Can I get involved? Which is really lovely. And not everybody's available every time, so it's quite useful to have a larger pool to call on.
Thank you. Okay, so we just had another question. Does anyone run a repair cafe and use a generator to produce electricity? Jo, you're laughing, so I'm going to pick on you.
One of our workshops, we built a bike generator. So I should pull it out and tell them, you know, how to check your toaster's working. You're going to have to start cycling, guys.
Okay. And just to say that if again, if you are in Oxfordshire, we might be able to help with that. If you don't have access to mains, that's something we can help with. Question: Do you have to use repaircafe.org? I think if I understand the question correctly, is it do you need to sort of register with this organisation in order to call yourself a repair cafe? If that's the question, then I'd say no, you don't need to. but I'm sure there's lots of useful resources that you can get there, but also from various other organisations, which I'll mention later on. And I would just add to that, Jill, on volunteers mentioned, other volunteers might be general runners, tea and coffee makers, and clearer-uppers. So in terms of resources that are needed, how did you go about getting spares and consumables, for example, from local businesses? Firstly, Jo or Phoebe, do you want to touch on that?
We often get people, so if something can't be fixed and they don't want to take it home because it's broken, they might donate it, and we take spare parts from items that can't be fixed. That's quite a good way of getting bits and bobs. Another way is sort of approaching local businesses and seeing if they will donate any spare parts. But they tend to sort of just accumulate as you run repair cafes, coming from bits you can't fix, and people will bring things in and not need them and leave them, that kind of thing. And people tend to be very willing to sort of go away, buy a spare part and come back and have it fitted the next month. So whilst we obviously fix things for free, often people will sort of purchase the spare part themselves. And obviously you can also use your donations that you collect to buy any sort of small consumables like fuses and things as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, very much the same experience as you said, Phoebe. We get a lot of spare bits. We've got a whole box of plugs chopped off various non-working things, and sometimes when we've had to buy something specific like the drive belts for the cassette player, you have to buy 100. So you have all these kind of packs of things where you've taken 2 or 3 out, and they do kind of accumulate. We haven't had to buy much of that really. Bigger things where people need a spare part, they do tend to go and buy it themselves and bring it back the next month.
Thank you. And just to mention that, again, if you're, sorry, I keep saying this, if you're not in Oxfordshire, this might be getting boring by now, but if you are in Oxfordshire, then we can also provide sort of a toolkit that does have sort of a range of consumables and parts that you could use, particularly for doing electrical and electronic repairs. So we had another question. Would you, basically about legal structure, would you set up as a charitable entity or a limited company? Maybe I can take that one. I think, I mean, you certainly could. I think that the structure that you choose sort of depends on your organisation, but at the very, at the very minimum, you would just want to be a constituted community group, which basically means you're a community group that has a constitution. It's not, you're not at a sort of legally, you're not a legally incorporated entity, but that does allow you to get insurance. It allows you to set up a bank account. So that's probably, quite a good starting point for groups who just want to get started. And then there are kind of other legal structures you might want to have depending on what you're doing. Does that, I don't know if John, who asked that question, if you've had a sort of more specific question, if that answers it. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to. I'll take that as having answered the question. Okay, great. All right, so Henry asked, does anyone know of any other companies or organisations in the UK that are taking donations of items? For example, you mentioned sort of the laptops and smartphones that you've been repairing. So places that you could donate those. Someone's put a link in there for the Restart project for places that you can donate. So local charities, etc. I don't know, Jo, if you just want to sort of say what you've been doing with your donated items, and how did you work with any other organisations?
We had a few businesses get in touch and offer to donate items. We've had the Oxfordshire County Council supporting us a bit further down the line. When it got to sort of September, October time, they are collecting in libraries and things, and we're getting some things through there. Yeah, we did have a business the other day say, we've got a few bits of tech, can you take them? And it turned out to be over 100 desktop computers. And the answer was no, we didn't have the space. But I think once people know what you're doing, people will tend to get in touch with you.
Excuse me.
Did I answer the question?
With computers that you do recycle effectively, do you put a different operating system on there, or do you clean the hard drives?
Yeah, we take everything off and put on Ubuntu and LibreOffice.
Right, okay, cool, thanks.
No worries.
Thanks, Joe. And another question about timing. So do the cafes tend to be on weekdays or weekends, and have you noticed a more successful time? And maybe you could, if you're doing online events, maybe that could also, you could also answer that as well.
We tend to find
or Phoebe, sorry, Joe, I'm picking on you a lot.
Sorry, Joe, do you want to go?
Phoebe, go for it.
We tend to find that Saturday mornings work really well for both volunteers and visitors. We have a couple that run on weekdays. So for example, the ones based at the universities tend to run on weekdays. But in general, we found about 10 till 1 works really well on a Saturday. So when people are sort of around and can come along, and when volunteers are available as well.
Thank you. Joe, have you found the same thing? As Saturday morning seem to be a good time, or?
Yeah, we do 10 till 1 of the Saturday morning, and it works pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Okay. Oh, and Jill just mentioned that another thing that's important to have is a good first aid kit and a first aider available. And that also might, if you've got insurance, you should have insurance, and that might be a condition of insurance to make sure that you've got a first aider at your event. So that's something to bear in mind. Okay, yeah, just a question here on what thoughts are on people who might not have the time, inclination or motivation for repair, or are unsure what can be repaired. What's a good way of motivating people to get involved? I don't know if either of you want to chime in on that.
I think one of the amazing things about repair cafes is they appeal to so many different people for different reasons. So we do get quite a few people that come along, and they're really not there for the environmental benefits of fixing something. It might just be that they can't afford to go out and buy a new toaster and they need to get it fixed for free. Or it might be that they just want to come and have a sit and a chat and a cup of tea with a neighbour, because that's their way of feeling connected to their community, and they meet some lovely friends through the event. So for a lot of people, a repair cafe isn't really about the repair, which is great because it means you're bringing more people into that space, and if they get something fixed along the way, then that's brilliant. So yeah, I think it depends on your target area. So we find that some of our cafes are running quite deprived areas, and that might be that there's more of a economic driver to people wanting to come along to the cafe. And then others, there's people who just really want to save the planet and want to fix things and stop them going to landfill. So there's lots of different reasons why people come along, and that's why I think they're so popular, because they appeal to so many people. And also someone mentioned applying for small pots of funding earlier, and it's worth bearing in mind all those different boxes that a repair cafe ticks, because it means you can access lots of different types of funding as well. If you are approaching your local authority, or you are looking at local supermarket funding, for example, you can tick the community box, the environmental box, the mental health box, the skill sharing box, all of them. So there's lots of ways of accessing funding as well because of that.
Thank you. Thanks, Phoebe. And just another question, what do you find tends to be the most popular sort of types of repair that people request? What are the items that people tend to bring in the most? Definitely
household electricals. We get so many toasters, lots of hoovers, lots of hair straighteners, lawn mowers. Bikes are quite popular as well, actually. We have quite a few bikes, but mainly I would say the vast majority is small household electricals. Do you find the same thing, Joe?
Yeah, definitely. And it's really interesting. Things tend to come in waves. So we had, like, the first time we did a blender, we did 3 in the morning. And then, you know, a few months later, we had 4 hoovers. It's just really random that they all seem to come together. But yeah, household electricals by far and away the biggest.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think I also heard that like clothes tend to be quite a popular one as well. I don't know if you found that to be the case.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Again, it depends on, so some of our cafes will have 3 textiles volunteers, and then they'll get loads of clothes through the doors. And then coming back to something that Jo mentioned about sort of competing with local repair businesses, some of our cafes choose to only repair clothes rather than alter them, so that they're not taking business away. So they would, for example, fix a rip in a jacket, but they wouldn't take up the sleeves, for example, because it's still usable with long sleeves. It's you know, a cosmetic alteration. So that's something to consider with clothes. And then the only thing we don't fix actually is microwaves, just because they have a tendency to explode, really. So we don't fix microwaves. That's the only thing on the small household electricals.
Thank you. Angela's just said that she's a GP and wonders if local GP surgeries could be a good place to advertise the cafes. Yeah, I suppose I don't know what the footfall was like at the moment compared to normal, but certainly that could be a good place. And yeah, as you mentioned, it could be a way to link up with social prescribing as well, potentially getting people involved. And looks like for lots of people, electricals, electronics tend to be the main thing that people are getting. Brilliant. Okay, so we've just got a few minutes left. So what I might do, I'll just touch on that last question. So do electrical repairers need any sort of qualification? In my experience, no. But they do, obviously you want them to be competent. In terms of the exact experience that they need, that's normally going to be determined by the insurer that you're working with. So again, it's worth speaking to them about that, just to make sure that you don't end up sort of, you know, potentially with your insurance being invalidated. So normally competence looks like either, having a qualification or, you know, having a significant amount of experience of doing repairs. It's worth keeping a record of that, so that if you ever do need to kind of evidence that you've got that on file. And again, the PAT testing is the main thing that they ask for, so you definitely want to make sure that everyone's done a PAT testing training. Okay, so I'm just gonna share my screen one last time. So I'm just popping a Google form in the chat first of all. So this is just an expression of interest form. So if anyone does live in Oxfordshire County and you're potentially interested in setting up a repair project here, then you can just put your details in there, and I'll be in touch at some point, probably at the start of the new year, about kind of how we might be able to support, and potentially putting you in touch with other people who've also expressed an interest. So just to touch on a couple of other organisations that can also help groups. So as we've mentioned, Repair Cafe Wales can help groups that are running repair cafes, both in Wales but also in the rest of the UK, and they do also, as part of that, provide an insurance cover for groups. That insurance cover tends to be, it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate for a group that was running lots of different activities, but if you were just running a repair cafe, that could be an option for you. Also, Community Action Groups Devon, if you're based there, they can also help you. And the Restart Project, if you're interested in setting up an initiative that's working specifically on electricals and electronics, then they can also provide you with support, whether you're in the UK or beyond. Here's a little bit more about the support that we'll be offering here. So we'll be offering 20 hours of one-to-one support from an experienced repair organiser. We'll also be offering training on repairing electricals and electronics in the new year, as well as support with health and safety and insurance. We've also got mini grants to cover costs such as venue hire if you don't manage to secure a free venue, and other small expenses. We've also got a sort of physical repair cafe toolkits that contain spare parts, a pat tester, the consumables, and we've also got a repair cafe guide, and can provide support with promoting your events and your activities. So that's all for now. I just want to say thanks you very much, both thanks to Phoebe and to Joe for helping out this evening. Thanks everyone for coming. So close to Christmas and you all still made it. So thank you very much. And so tomorrow I'll also share the recording. I'll share the slides from the presentation, and a few of the resources that might be helpful for you. So yeah, thank you very, very much, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks. Happy repairing.
Thank you.